Welcome everyone to our first webinar, Organizing 101, Community Organizing and Power Building, led by our housing organizers, field organizers for National Low Income Housing Coalition, Billy and Tia. So welcome them in. Feel free to, if you have any questions along the presentation, to send the question to our Q&A box. Please make sure you send it into the Q&A box versus the chat, so I won't get lost with all the other messages. And then also, as you guys will continue to come in for the new participants, go ahead and put where you're from and what organization you're with in the chat, and look forward to you guys learning on this presentation. At this time, I give it to Billy and Tia to take over.
Alrighty, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Tia, and I'm one of the field organizers for NLIHC. Really happy to be on with you all and doing this session with you all today. I cover a good bit of the Southeast, Southwest area, and I'll pass it to my colleague, Billy.
Hey everyone, great to be here today. My name is Billy Cerullo. I'm one of the other housing advocacy organizers with the region in the Southeast and Midwest, Mid-Atlantic. It's kind of a bizarre region. So as we get started today, Tia and I wanted to take a little bit of time to talk about sort of what brings us to this work and where we're coming from. So I've been organizing now for the last 8 years, both community organizing, also union organizing in North Carolina. So shout out to anyone from Robeson County or the Fayetteville area, but also DC, Richmond, Virginia, Baltimore, Maryland. I love this work. I love teaching this work, and in general, just excited to be here. And I'll let Tia share the same.
Yeah, so I got my start in community organizing in Huntsville, Alabama, about 5 years ago, doing a lot of work starting off with voting rights and really bringing that to our low income areas, and also really helping our unhoused folks in Huntsville, Alabama, with evictions that were happening, and also getting some ordinances passed and organizing, and started an organization back home, and just doing this work that I love. Came to NLIHC a year ago, and just really excited to be on with you all today. And I'll pass it back to my colleague.
All right, so here's our agenda for today. Before even getting into this, let's do a little bit of housekeeping. I want to reiterate, and people are already doing this, which is great. Please, 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 throughout this presentation, especially at the end when we have time for Q&A, post any questions you have in the Q&A feature instead of the chat. It's so much easier to read them, and I don't want to make sure that we're not missing anything. And I think that's actually honestly pretty much it for housekeeping. So, going into our agenda for today, today is all about the basics of community organizing. And we're going to start with talking about power. Because in organizing, you cannot talk about organizing, you cannot define organizing without first defining power and being on the same page. Going into defining organizing and sort of further defining power, we're going to distinguish between advocacy, activism, and organizing. A lot of times the three kind of get lumped together as the same thing. Neither is better nor worse than the other, but it's super important that we distinguish the three as sort of three separate things. Then we're going to go into the cycle of organizing, which is your roadmap for any successful organizing campaign. And then last, close it out and take some Q&A. So our goals for today, one, I want to emphasize this is basic. This is super, super basic. This is just the tip of the iceberg. If you want more, please reach out to us, reach out to Dee, reach out to anybody on the field team. We'd love to have more of these trainings. But the goals really are to get a basic understanding of what organizing is and is not, to learn the definition of power in the context of organizing, and to learn the cycle of organizing that you can then apply to your own work in your own context. So we're going to start with a poll. For this poll, we're going to answer the question, is power, when you think about power, is it good, is it bad, or is it neutral inherently? So cast your votes now. There sort of is a right answer here, but do you think when you hear that word power, do you think it is a good thing? Do you think it is a neutral thing or a bad thing? And the poll should be live, I believe. We'll give it a couple more seconds before we show the results. Okay. Mostly neutral, but also have some good and bad. Interesting. I want to put a pin in that because we're going to come back and revisit this and define it again in the context of organizing. Um, but very interesting. So moving forward, let's talk about an introduction to organizing. More importantly, what is organizing not? Organizing is not advocacy, nor is it activism. So let's start with advocacy. Advocacy is typically folks that work for nonprofits, folks who might be involved in a community, but might not necessarily represent the community being affected by the issue you're working on. So it's a lot of times speaking on behalf of others. Oftentimes it's lawyers, researchers, policy wonks, people with the data, the statistics. Activism is usually centered on an individual. Now, this is someone who is charismatic, who can rally a crowd, who can get a crowd going, who has a lot of pull, right? It's like the Reverend Barber here, for example. Some other examples I would note, Martin Luther King. He was an activist, right? He could rally a crowd. Greta Thunberg, also, we're thinking about current times and the climate justice movement. It's usually someone who can get folks talking and get someone, a group of people excited about an issue. They're very good typically at mobilizing. Organizing is something different. Organizing is about people in a community affected by an issue coming together to build power, which we'll define in a moment. And it's about bringing people together that have a shared self-interest to come together to figure out what is our common goal to shape policies, politics, and outcomes. So when we're talking about self-interest is what motivates us to act, or on the other hand, not to act. Same with elected officials, same with the folks in power. What motivates them to act or to not act? And power in the context of organizing is neutral. So kudos to whoever voted neutral. The reason being is if we do not have power, we do not have the ability to change anything. And we define power in an organizing context as the ability to act and achieve purpose. And we want to achieve purpose, right? We want to achieve our goals. We want to make change. Well, in order to do that, we need power. In the face of so many forces that have power over us, we need to build the power to combat that. And political power comes in two forms. You have organized people, and you also have organized money. Now, a lot of times we don't have money, right? Especially if we are forming a tenant union, probably one of the last things we have is $1 billion in the bank, right? But what we do have is people with a shared self-interest that more often than not want to come together and at the very least see a path forward to achieve the changes that they want to make. If there's one thing that you're going to take away from this training, this is it. So feel free to screenshot or take a picture now. This is the cycle of community organizing, and this is your roadmap for any successful organizing campaign. I would also add, I mean, if you're an advocate doing advocacy work, doing activist work, this is also, you can use that for those purposes as well. But for organizing, we always start with our base. So phase one is base building. That's where you get the people in the room to talk about what issues exist and start to figure out how we're going to change them. But more importantly, it's about building relationships between people in a community that are experiencing a similar problem. After you do that, you pick an issue. What is the thing that you are working on? What is the thing you want to change, to keep, to dismantle? And then once you have chosen that, you got to do your research. So for any policy folks, researchers in the room, this is your time to shine. Because this is where you have to figure out who are the power players, why has this change not happened, or why is this change happening now that we don't like? What is it going to take to win? What is our strategy? How much power do we need to win? After that is when you take action. And I want to note that's 4 phases into this cycle. A lot of times we want to move right to action, right to the rallies, the boycotts, the protests, but we can't do that without those 3 phases that come before. Super, super important. And then last, evaluation. What went well? What didn't go well? Did we win? Did we lose? Why? Why not? And central to all of this is leadership development. So when we're talking about organizing, we're not talking about a leader-less movement. In organizing, there's no hierarchy. Instead of thinking of it as a leader-less movement, we should think of it as a leader-full movement. So that if one person has all of the answers, the strategy, the data, what happens if that person leaves? We need to build a movement that is going to last beyond just a single campaign. And we do that by building leadership. So let's start with phase one. This is base building. I was trained out in the Bay Area through PICO. It's a faith-based organizing group, also with IAF in Chicago. They're big on principles of organizing. So I'm giving that disclaimer because you're going to hear a lot of principles thrown out throughout this presentation. Bear with me. But when I think about base building, what I think about first is the principle of organizing that says there is power in relationships. That it's not just about the number of people that you get at a meeting, at a rally, at an action, at a boycott. In my view, the measure of success is those people that turned out, how tight are they? What are the relationships that they share with each other? Because that is so much more threatening to whoever our target is. It's not just the number of people, it's they have a really close-knit group and they are really tight. And Ella Baker, famous organizer from Scott, you name a movement in the 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, she was involved in some way. Famous organizer, mostly in the civil rights movement, started SNCC, Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. She would ask all the time, who are your people? That's the starting point. When you're thinking about a problem or an issue, a campaign you're working on, who are the people immediately impacted by this issue? And then what is it going to take to get them into a room? So some questions to consider as we're thinking about base building. Again, how much power do you need to win? And then what does power in numbers look like? Not necessarily to you as the organizer or as someone being organized, but what does power need to look like for the people we're trying to influence? And also, how many people do I want in my central organizing committee? There are a lot of names for that. A lot of people will say OCs, just organizing committee in general. But any organizing campaign should usually have a core group of sort of go-to people that are making the decisions, that hold a lot of relationships, that are sort of the go-to leaders. And on the topic of leaders, It leads me to another principle of organizing, which is organizers teach leaders, leaders organize. I'm sure a lot of us in this space might be guilty of putting a lot of the work on us as organizers, but that could also lead to us taking away opportunities to develop leadership from others and to build a truly grassroots movement. So I'm going to hand it over to Tia real quick.
Yeah, so just piggybacking off of my colleague Billy, one thing that you want to consider when you're talking about and thinking about base building as far as relationally, you really want to use deep relational settings to be able to understand what people really care about, what their fears are, and what they're hoping for. And then out of those relationships, you should consider that relationships are the foundation of organizing. They'll help to sustain the work when tactics get hard. And you also want to look at it from an equity lens as well, as you're building a trust across race, language, ability, and age, and create those spaces where people feel seen and valued. And like one of the things that I always consider is like that there's no organizing without trust, and there's no trust without relationships. And so that's something that I really try to think about and carry with me as I'm thinking about building those relationships as you're kind of base building. And so I'll kick it back over to Billy as we get into developing leaders.
Thanks, Tia. I'll add to, if anyone in this space, excuse me, is a service provider, in my view, you are poised to do this work because to Tia's point, you got that trust. People are coming to you to help fix the problems that they're experiencing, a lot of times heavy stuff, right? So I think I would argue that you all are incredibly poised to engage in this work because you got that relationship, you got the trust, and it might be a little easier or more organic to build. So, still on the topic of base building, we talked a little bit about your OC, your central organizing committee. This is a way to visualize what your base should look like. It's called the snowflake model. Ideally, if you're building out a strong base, ideally, you have your core at the center. That's like your steering committee, the people that are making the decisions, the people that have really close relationships and trust with each other. But branching out from that, all of those leaders are building relationships with other folks and developing their leadership. Again, organizers teach leaders, leaders organize. And then from there, those folks are building relationships and bringing others into the fold. So by the time you get to action, which again is like 3 phases from now, it's so much easier to turn people out because you got those relationships and turnout doesn't fall to just one person or 2 people. It is a group effort. And it's so much easier to say, I can call this person, and this person, and I know they'll be there because I've been prepping them now for months or years even. So again, when we're thinking about base building, a way to visualize it is this snowflake model. All right. So you're bringing your base together. Now we have to talk about what is the thing we're working on. So in organizing, we make a distinction between problems and issues, which might sound like semantics, but it's super important still. Because if we are focusing a campaign on a problem, which is something that is big, that's something that's overwhelming, it's going to be really hard to win. It's going to be really hard to achieve our goals. And it's going to be really hard to keep people motivated and engaged. You'll burn people out real fast. Issues, on the other hand, are sort of like bite-sized pieces of that larger problem. I mean, so many times when we're in spaces talking about policy and we're talking about homelessness, issues around homelessness, for example, you could take that conversation in 1,000 different ways about why that is such a problem. So to visualize sort of the difference between problems and issues, problems are the big tree, the trunk, the leaves, the branches. It's the part that you can see, that you can feel, that is readily apparent. A lot of times, the things that people talk about first: homelessness, capitalism, maybe, racism. It's those big, big, overwhelming problems. But the issues are the roots that give life to that bigger problem. So if you try to kill a tree, right? Unless you have a big axe, unless you have the machinery, money, it's going to be hard. So in organizing, our goals more often than not are to kill the roots, chip away at that big problem to kill the bigger tree. And Tia.
Yeah, so as Billy is stating, you really want to look for the root causes and not just the systems. And so, for an example around housing, so there may be mold as an issue in your apartment complex, but the root may be that's the problem. The mold is the problem, but the root may be like landlord neglect and lack of tenant protections. And so, those are the things that when you're thinking about what the root causes are is just some things to consider. And so you want to really center like the analysis, also center the analysis of systems of oppression. So you think about racism, poverty, and all of those things. These are all the things that shape housing outcomes. And as you're thinking about what the problems are versus the issues, just keeping all of these things in mind would be helpful to as you're organizing and doing the work.
So along those lines, again, homelessness is a problem. Some issues potentially. And again, none of these are right. It depends on your context. It depends on, what is winnable, what is doable. Funding for COCs, maybe just policies around just cause eviction, right to counsel. Those affect, people who are being housed. Defeating homelessness criminalization bills, that could be an issue. That's a piece of this. Increase funding for public housing. You could go a bunch of different ways, and we could have a whole training just on how to do a root cause analysis, which we're not going to do today for the sake of time. But again, if you're interested, let us know. But yeah, it's about getting to that root, the root of the problem, and focusing your resources around something that is effective, which sort of brings us to this next piece. Defining what are effective wants, effective goals, what are maybe ineffective wants, ineffective goals. I'm also seeing some awesome questions in the chat, and I'm excited to get to those. So, starting with ineffective, again, an ineffective want is something that tries to fix something that is vague, something that is overwhelming, or a general problem. Like this campaign, I'm going to launch a campaign tomorrow to solve homelessness. That feels heavy. Feels really big. I don't know where to start. Versus pursuing a specific solution to an issue. Again, chipping away. Our group, we're going to work around pushing a law for eviction ceiling, for example. That's one piece. Ineffective one, it centers a symptom, a cosmetic change, as opposed to like what Tia was saying, centers a root cause, something that is going to make a tangible difference in people's lives. And again, ineffective want, something that doesn't necessarily address a concrete problem within the community in which you're operating. Versus an effective want, if achieved, results in a noticeable change in people's lives, which is how you keep momentum and keep people coming back. Ineffective, it's in someone else's power to achieve. We feel this a lot in DC. We do not have a single member of Congress, voting member of Congress. A lot of times we think about all of this federal work. Well, who are we going to call? We don't have members of Congress. So it can be hard to conceptualize how are we going to fight this issue? Versus an effective one is something that you and your people have the direct power to influence and achieve. An ineffective one can be achieved by your actions alone, versus an effective one is through the work of many. We're building something, we're building a movement. And last, ineffective only results in a cultural shift, kind of harkening back to some of the other things we were talking about, versus effective is a tangible thing that people can feel. So you've picked your issue, you're ready to move the campaign forward. Now you got to do your research. So when we're talking about research, one of the first things we have to figure out, who are our targets? And some people have issue with the word target. They think it's a little too aggressive. If people have better words, please let me know because I've yet to find one that's better. Um, when we're thinking about targets, we got to figure out who is our primary target, who is the person, not the institution, but the person that has direct control over the thing that we want. And who are the secondary targets? Secondary targets are the folks who have influence over our primary target. For example, a primary target could be a chair of a specific committee in your state legislature, in Congress, usually someone that has direct power and authority over the thing that you're working on. The secondary targets could be other members of that committee that have a good relationship or just a relationship centered in respect with your primary target. Thinking about the current administration, if the president is our primary target, members of the cabinet could be a potential secondary target. Folks that we can try to move our ultimate target. Also, when we're talking about research, what is the policy surrounding our issue? We got to bring in all the policy folks to understand what are, potential levers, what are the mechanisms by which we can achieve our goals, what will it take to win, but also what has been done in the past. Like, why is this still an issue? Folks have been fighting for this change forever and it hasn't happened. Well, why? And once you've figured out the power players, the people that you need to influence in one shape or form, you plot all of them on what's called a power map. And you use an XY grid. Shout out to any algebra nerds in the space. Use an XY grid to plot who are the people that have influence, specifically most influence, least influence at the bottom, who supports us, and who opposes us. So that when you plot them up on this document, that is a living document that you always have when you get to this research phase, who are the people that we need to target the most? So looking at this, I'm seeing that the mayor has the most influence, but they're not a big supporter of ours. They're not all the way to the left, but they're certainly not to the right. So we got to figure out what it's going to take to influence the mayor. Versus Councilman Timid, sure, they support us a little bit, but they don't have any power. So what does it matter? So super, super important when we're talking about guiding your strategy to plot people on this map to figure out where you have to spend your time because we cannot influence everybody. All right, you've done your research, got your issue, you've figured out who your primary target is. Now you got to take action. There are a lot of actions happening right now. For the last like 10 years, it feels like there's a different action every week. So I want to take some time to talk about the distinction between effective actions and ineffective actions. In effective actions, we are asking who? Who are the people that we are turning out? Why are we turning them out? And how does this relate to our target self-interest? Versus ineffective actions, just ask how many people. Oh, the action went great. We had 100 people there. All right, but what happened after that? When everyone went home? And also, like, did you know the people that were there? Effective actions, 90% of the people in the room. And again, effective actions are a means to an end. I don't think I've ever seen it to where one action alone gets you the thing that you want. Actions are a cascading process. You have to do them over and over and over again. They change every time. Your strategy will change every time because it's not as simple as doing one action and then getting the thing that you want in most cases. Ineffective actions are seen as something that is an end within itself. Our campaign was great. We had this great action. Well, if nothing resulted from it, then it wasn't that great. It wasn't effective. Effective actions, there is always follow up. Again, this is a means to an end, not the end in itself. We're following up with all the attendees. To Tia's point earlier, we're scheduling one-to-ones with them to build relationships, to build trust with the people that did turn out, to strengthen our base even more. Ineffective actions, when it's over, it's over. We go home. And maybe I'll see you at the next one, but I don't even know who you are. So in effective actions in evaluating, we look for the reaction, specifically the reaction of our target. Did our target respond to us? Did our target post on social media, for example? Ineffective actions in evaluating, you're looking at logistics. Again, how many people turned out? It was great. We had 100 people in front of Congress. Well, if a tree falls in the forest and no one is around to hear it, does it make a sound? Effective, again, you get something new every single time. You get new people, you get a new reaction, you get new support, new possibilities, new levers that you can use to move your target. Whereas ineffective, you burn out. How many people in this group right now have gone to actions over and over and over again? And then finally, you're just like, I don't know why I'm doing this. Nothing's changing. In fact, things are getting worse. And last, effective actions, you're working towards something that is broken. There is a specific ask of your target. Not, I'm calling on you for more housing, for example. That's kind of opaque. And like, what if they added one more new unit of housing? Well, hey, I gave you what you asked for. I gave you one more new unit. We have to be really, really specific with what we're asking for. Whereas ineffective actions focus more on what's broken, where we're talking about all the things that are going wrong, as opposed to the specific, tangible, measured things that we want. And when we come to the end, final stage, we evaluate. And I think this part is so often missed and so crucial. How are people feeling? So beyond just the did we win, did we lose, why not? How are all of us feeling in this space? Do we still feel energized? Do we feel a little burnt out? Another principle of organizing, when in doubt, do a one-to-one. If you're doubting sort of how the campaign is going, doubting how you're doing as an organizer, meet with your people. And 9 times out of 10, they'll give you an answer that maybe you don't want necessarily, but that you need. I once got pulled over on the side of the street by a group that I was organizing, and they said, we need to completely change the structure of these meetings. Get in the car, let's go get lunch. And we did. And it was great. And they were totally right. So constantly be evaluating throughout each phase of the cycle, but especially at the end of a campaign. And when it's over, you do it all again. I want to take a few minutes. We talked about sort of a lot of examples for in-person stuff, base building, meeting in person. I think a great virtual example, especially now, meeting over Zoom, technology is able to give us so many more opportunities to try to build relationships with folks. I prefer in person. I think you just get a different feel for each other, but we're in a state now where it's easier now to build those relationships over Zoom, over Google Hangout, whatever, pick your poison. Choosing an issue, you being able to use polls, being able to use surveys to send out on Facebook, social media, wherever people are at, to collect directly from the community the issues that they care most about. as you're trying to figure out the thing that you're working on. And even with research, like honestly, Twitter has been great in my experience for its many, many faults. To be able to see sort of who is posting what, who has tweeted about, the issue that we're working on in the past, how many followers do they have, and actions. In addition to the boycotts, the protests, the rallies, the town halls that might be in person, you can do a lot of that on Zoom too. You could do tweet storms. If elected officials, if whoever you're focusing on is involved heavily on Twitter or Instagram or wherever they're at, that could be a good opportunity to sort of shine some light on them and ask the thing that you're asking for. And evaluation, polls, which we did at the beginning, are a really great way to quickly collect data. Some recap. Oh, Tia, go ahead.
You can finish, Billy. Go ahead.
So, some recap. One, power is neutral. Power is the ability to act and achieve purpose. We need power. The cycle of organizing is your roadmap for any successful organizing campaign. Organizing, I feel like, is equal parts science and art. The science is there. There's no shortcuts. There's literally a book written that's called No Shortcuts about organizing. The art is how you do it. And there are distinctions between advocacy, activism, and organizing. So, some questions to consider. Where do you want to go, and what do you need to get there? And how can we help, more importantly? So I want to hand it over to Tia. You can see both of our emails here. Reach out anytime, and I'm excited for Q&A.
Yeah, great job, Billy, explaining and breaking all of that down. This is Billy's lane. He's so phenomenal at what he does. And I just wanted to like kind of give like real life tangible stories and how this can like actually work. And so before I got to NLIHC, a big part of what I was doing back home in Huntsville, Alabama, was just this same tactic, using the resources that I had, as Billy says, to get what I want. And there were at a point of time, because our city was growing so fast back home in Huntsville, they started to carry out a lot of encampment evictions and started to close down camps, and people weren't getting housed. And so, because I was in the voting rights arena, and we were really leveraging our partnerships and relationships with our unhoused folks and educating them on their rights, voting rights, and different things like that. Because of those encampment evictions started to occur very often, we started to really jump into action in the work that we were doing back home. And so I got all of my organizing buddies in the voting rights era, and we just started like going before the city, and like we started building relationships with the folks that were in the camps, asking them what they needed and how we could bring other service providers into the fold, that they were already had relationships with, or relationships were already broken rather. And one of the things that we started to do a lot of research, started to really see what the needs were. And obviously the need was housing, adequate housing, safe housing, affordable housing. And because we didn't have any systems around really taking hold of our that would really carry our homelessness system in Huntsville, we really started to be like the hands, and not the mouthpiece. We would take our unhoused folks with us to city council meetings, and we would just really empower them to really speak out, let the public know, and educate the public through social media. And we started to build relationships with organizations that had bigger platforms than ours at the time, like SPLC, having them to come out and do news stories. And these are all the things, when you think about digital organizing and tools that you can use. We didn't have any money. A lot of this was just organizing to like get to what the community needed. And out of the result of the just showing up, continuing to go to meetings, continuing to follow up with the city council members who needed to be able to vote a certain way, and educating them on what the issues are, asking them to come out and see what's happening at the camps, and all of those things. Out of the result of that, we were able to get an ordinance passed during the time of like our city. It was the first ever, and they passed an ordinance to where they created affordable housing, and they utilized the city resources and some other private resources to be able to start our first affordable housing unit. And it was a huge deal. And when you think about organizing and you think about all of these things, it's so many factors, and it's things that a lot of times I think we get discouraged because we feel like we don't have the resources. But as you utilize the people that are in the network that you do have, like we were using SPLC to get the story out, and partnering with other organizations, educating our COC on what organizing and advocacy truly meant, where it would really tear down those misconceptions of organizing and advocacy work. And so these are like stories that I know so many of us have seen a lot of successes. But as you really consider just organizing, really look at the things that you have that's within your reach, and really reflect on what those things are and what you can do. Who are the partners? Who are the power players? What are organizations that may not be completely aligned with you in your work, but have somewhat some of the same shared goals and visions, and partner with those organizations, is where you'll really start to see the most impact. And so we just, as Billy stated, that we're here as a resource here at NLIHC. If you want to sit down with your field organizers or D to really break this down even more, we're here as a resource, and we're really excited about the work that D is doing with the Institute, and really hope that you all get all the tools that you need to be effective in the work that you're doing. And so I'll pass it to D if you want to get us started on the questions.
Yes. Okay. So go ahead. We're going to move to Q&A. Give a round of applause to Billy and Tia for an awesome presentation on organizing one-on-one. And so we have a few minutes for Q&A, and then we will do the closing remarks.
All right. These questions are great. I tried to furiously answer some of them. I'm going to start at the bottom because that's easier. Um, Very good question. In Mississippi, is there help with rural organizing? Yes. Happy to help with that. I would add, I think that again, with the sort of um, organizing and the cycle in particular, let's see if I can go back. The cycle in particular, this cycle is not for organizing in a city. It's not for organizing in rural communities. It's just for organizing. So to the point that it is equal parts science and art. So I think one of the first things is to figure out, right, when you're building your base, thinking about it in your own context. So there's no, I don't think, single right answer to say, like, you have to do X, Y, and Z to build that base, other than meeting with people. But how that sort of works and how you do that is probably going to depend on your context. So, for example, in a city, maybe it's going to the local Y, or I don't, God, I should know this off the top of my head. I'm in Washington, D.C. Or like just looking for different community-based events. In rural communities, maybe it's going to, you know, figuring out sort of where people are congregating. Is it a church? Um, is it a hall? Is it schools? So again, I think this won't change. This cycle doesn't change whether or not you're in an urban setting or a rural setting. It's how you do each part that might look slightly different. I think the biggest part is the base building and just building that out. I think that's the part that probably looks the most different. Let me see. All right, seeing this one from Akai. Many people internalize their impression, and our society is so good at distracting people from what is in their economic and community interests. How can we get people to focus on becoming involved in mobilizing? I think the first step, I think even before thinking about mobilizing folks, is to think about the base building piece and the trust and the relationships you have to build with people to ultimately have that trust so that they will turn out to an action. So yeah, I think in thinking about what is it going to take to mobilize, I would go like 5 steps back. What is it going to take to build relationships with the people that I need to build relationships with to understand the things that they care about in this community? I might have, as an organizer, I might have an idea of what folks care about. It could be totally different from what is actually the top issue. So I think step one is just sitting down and being intentional about how you're building those relationships with folks. I hope that answers your question. Let me see. In communities like ours, where 4 Title I schools exist within 2 to 6 miles apart, children are learning to rely on public assistance as a norm due to generational poverty and lack of access to affordable housing. How can we organize in a way that breaks this cycle and shifts power? Yes. To me, reading this question, I think a lot about that second phase, choosing an issue. Because again, like even for me reading this, thinking about like generational poverty, that is a massive, that's a problem. That is huge. That's overwhelming. How do you launch a campaign that is supposed to end generational poverty? So in reading this question, where my mind immediately goes is what is the issue? And particularly to parents, to teachers, to people within that community, what is the issue? What is the issue that for them is the root cause of that bigger problem? Because that theoretically could be an amazing first campaign. Let's see. Yeah, LaRonda, don't do canvassing. Organize. Canvassing is like a tiny fraction of organizing. It can work, sometimes it doesn't. Um, but yeah, canvassing, that's burnout. You're doing the same thing over and over and over again, then you get sick of it. Let me see. In California, we need the needs of the SMI unhoused community at the County Mental Health Advisory Board or Commissioner. Oops. On proposition funding for this particular population to create low and very low income supportive housing in our community. Counties are required to submit a housing plan to state. Seeing as you're in California, would highly recommend reaching out to our colleague who covers California. And we'll put his email in the chat. Or not the chat, answering your question. I'm just trying to like run through these. Tia, do you have anything to add?
There's one that I think Dee would be really good at answering. It's can you give examples of how tenants in HUD funded housing and ELI individuals in need of housing can find established organizers who are already involved in advocating on their issues?
Yeah, one thing you could do is talk to your local stakeholders, and that could be your local city council, local churches. Believe it or not, there are many churches involved in organizing, and sometimes they may not market it and advertise it, but a lot of churches these days have a lot of committees, and one of them is organizing. And so reach out to local churches, reach out to different activists and community leaders. They may be more connected to the circle of organizing in your area. And if it's not anything going on there, then there's a door for you guys to start building power even more to create that momentum shift in organizing in your city.
I also just put some, I would argue, I would say too, get your people trained. If there's no one around you doing it, try to find training where, you know, you could be the organizer. Put some examples of places you can look up that may or may not operate in your area. IAF, the Industrial Areas Foundation, is one. They usually have trainings. Pico, which is West Coast kind of specific, but they do a lot of faith-based work. IAF does too. The Midwest Academy is another. also rising organizers, which is only really sort of in DC, but I volunteer with them. We're open to also doing trainings across the country.
And I think we are down to time. If you have any questions that you want to reach out with, definitely reach out to your field organizer, and we would love to help you. Other than that, we're going to pass it to D.
Yes, want to give big kudos to Billy and Tia. Shout them out in the chat if you can for a beautiful presentation and taking the time to be with us today. Feel free to reach out to us, and we definitely get you connected to in the right direction and resources you need. So thank you guys. Look forward to seeing you guys in the future.